Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Otavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Otavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Otavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Otavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Otavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Otavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, the friend had explained that Otavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Otavio to get his side of the story. Otavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Otavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Otavio and Heather, Otavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Otavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Otavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Otavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Otavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Otavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Otavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Otavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but had still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a lighthearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, he admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Krista Baker Alexander. Krista Ann Baker Alexander was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel, Jones County, Mississippi, to Pastor Winfred Baker and Patty Ann Baker. As the youngest child in her family, Krista was raised in a strong Christian household. In 1991, her family moved to Abota Springs, Louisiana, where they built their own church, and Krista became actively involved in its operations, starting her ministry at a young age. Krista accompanied Christian missionary organizations on numerous trips around the world, focusing on serving children and expressing her desire to start a family of her own one day. Meanwhile, she was homeschooled and pursued a degree in Christian education through online courses at North Tennessee Bible Institute. Krista's passion was serving others, especially children, and she longed to start her own family. Though she dreamed of getting married, her faith came first, and she adhered to traditional values, saving herself for marriage and only dating with the intention of marrying. Krista formed lovely friendships, including one with Cootie Alexander, a charismatic youth pastor who shared her passion for missionary work. Through their church, Krista's family became acquainted with Cootie, and they maintained a good relationship. After years of friendship, Cootie asked Krista's father for permission to marry her, and Winfred gladly gave his consent. Before getting married, Cootie and Krista followed church traditions and refrained from intimate contact. Krista confided in her parents that she wanted to share her first kiss with Cootie at the altar. While Krista helped her parents at church, Cootie was pursuing a career as a paramedic. After a year, they decided to get married. On March 1, 2008, they exchanged vows in front of their church community and family members. Krista was overjoyed, and it was a long-awaited day for her. Tragically, just 4 months after the wedding, Krista was found dead on June 29, 2008, at around 6 a.m. Cootie, who had just finished a night shift, returned home to find Krista's lifeless body lying face down on the floor. By the time he found her, she had already passed away. He immediately contacted the police. Krista's body was positioned to the left of the front door, with no visible signs of struggle or trauma. A single bullet wound was found in the back of her head, which experts determined was fired at extremely close range due to burn marks on her skin, suggesting the gun was almost touching her head at the time of the shot. A 9mm shell casing was discovered on the floor beside the body. The investigation hinted at a possible robbery gone wrong, where the perpetrator may have broken into the house believing it was empty, only to encounter Krista and decide to silence her as a witness. Upon examining the premises, signs of a thorough search were evident. A jewelry box had been opened on the bed, the gun cabinet had been broken into, and Krista's purse was found on the kitchen table, with its contents scattered as if the perpetrator was searching for something specific. Many drawers and cabinets were found open, indicating that the perpetrator was seeking something of value. When the police finished searching the house, they needed to speak with everyone who had access to it. The first person they interviewed was Krista's husband, Cootie Alexander. He was visibly distressed and tearful, so the investigators had to wait for him to compose himself before answering their questions. According to Cootie, everything seemed normal the previous night before he left for work. As an EMT with Cadence Ambulance, he worked overnight shifts. During his break, he attempted to contact Krista several times, but she didn't answer her phone. He also sent her multiple text messages, which she failed to respond to. Assuming she was exhausted, Cootie thought she had simply fallen asleep. When he returned home in the morning, he was immediately struck by the fact that the front door of their house was slightly open. Upon entering, he was met with a scene of chaos, with belongings scattered everywhere, and Krista lying on the floor, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. He checked her pulse, only to confirm that she had passed away. He instantly called the emergency services. The investigators' primary objective was to identify who might have visited the house during Cootie's work hours. It was possible that the perpetrator had taken advantage of Krista's solitude. They also sought to determine whether Krista might have voluntarily let the killer into the house. The lack of signs of struggle, both within the house and on her body, suggested that she may have been familiar with her attacker. This could mean that she did not sense any danger and therefore did not have time to resist. Cootie informed investigators that a rifle and a shotgun were missing from the gun cabinet and disclosed that his wife Krista was 17 weeks pregnant, so he had lost not only his wife, but also their unborn child. He was devastated and unsure how to continue his life. The crime scene appeared suspicious to investigators. The disarray in the house was puzzling. Although cabinets and drawers were open, there was no indication that anyone had searched through them. It seemed as though the perpetrator had intended to mislead the police. Similarly, the jewelry box was open, but the jewelry remained untouched. Krista's purse was open, yet all valuables were still present. Cootie reported that 2 weapons were missing from the house, which seemed strange given that there were more weapons available, but the criminal had selected only 2 for unknown reasons. Investigators wondered why the perpetrator hadn't taken all of them. Considering these inconsistencies, investigators concluded that the crime scene had been staged. It appeared that the perpetrator's primary intention was to take Krista Alexander's life, but had opted to disguise the act as a robbery. The police interviewed the neighbors of the Alexander couple to find potential witnesses, which led to an unexpected discovery. Mavis Rabel, their 69-year-old next-door neighbor and landlord, described the couple as quiet newlyweds who got married in March and were active in the Fundamental Baptist Church. Rabel portrayed Krista Alexander as a kind, helpful, and sweet woman who rarely went outside her tan brick house without her husband. Rabel expressed her shock, saying, "It's just unbelievable that somebody would want to harm her. You just don't expect something like this out here." She last saw the couple on Saturday afternoon when Cootie Alexander was collecting the turtles he had shot in his backyard pond the previous weekend. This information revealed to investigators that Cootie owned a gun, although no gun was found in their home. Cootie reported that the only stolen weapons were a rifle and a shotgun, but he did not mention the gun. Now, the detectives were determined to uncover what Cootie was concealing. They proceeded to the pond area, where they meticulously examined every detail and discovered several 9mm shell casings in the grass. These casings bore a striking resemblance to the one found adjacent to Krista's body. The police subsequently sent all the casings to the state crime lab for a thorough comparison. The resulting report left no room for doubt, unequivocally establishing that the gun Cootie had used to shoot at the turtles was indeed the same weapon used to shoot Krista. The investigators summoned Cootie to the police station for further questioning. He vehemently asserted that it was impossible for him to have shot his wife. According to Cootie, he had left for work at approximately 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 28, 2008, and returned at around 6 a.m. the following day. He claimed that his alibi was solid, as he had been on duty for the entire night. The investigators then spoke with his colleagues, who corroborated Cootie's alibi, confirming that he had spent the entire night at work. When questioned about the gun, Cootie claimed to have owned one, but stated that he had sold it to a stranger named Steve the day before the incident, receiving $500 in cash. However, this account was difficult to verify. Cootie described Steve as a 35-year-old white male, approximately 6'1" tall, who drove an old Toyota pickup truck. Cootie's story was met with skepticism by Krista's parents, who did not believe him. According to Krista's father, Winfred Baker, Cootie showed no emotional response to Krista's death. Moreover, Baker believed that Cootie's detachment began a few months prior to the wedding, when the couple started experiencing financial difficulties while living together, which were further complicated by Krista's pregnancy. Krista's parents informed investigators that they had suspected Cootie of cheating on his wife a few weeks prior to her death. According to Krista's friends, she had believed Cootie was having an affair with a colleague who had even attended their wedding. As the investigators delved deeper into Krista and Cootie Alexander's marriage, they became increasingly convinced that the couple had vastly different visions for their future. However, the question remained whether this disparity was a strong enough motive for Cootie to take the life of the mother of his unborn child. The police only had one lead, a man named Steve, whom Cootie claimed had bought the gun used to shoot Krista. The police launched a manhunt based on Cootie's description, hoping it would aid in the search. Meanwhile, investigators re-questioned Cootie, asking him to provide a detailed account of his activities before work, during his shift, and after returning home. However, his story deviated significantly from his initial statement. This time, he described his activities prior to work, but conveniently omitted mentioning Steve, a man who supposedly visited his house and purchased a gun from him. The investigators found it suspicious that Cootie showed no concern for Krista's well-being when she failed to answer his calls, despite knowing she was pregnant and alone at home. He could have easily asked a family member to check on her, but he didn't. The staged crime scene also raised further doubts about Cootie's innocence. As he struggled to maintain a coherent story, the investigators intensified their questioning to get to the truth. After hours of intense interrogation, Cootie finally admitted to a drastically different story. But was he now telling the truth? He claimed to have fallen asleep on the couch and was awakened late by his wife for his ambulance night shift. He insisted that he wasn't angry with her for waking him up late and that it wasn't an issue. Cootie claimed he had taken a gun to the house, intending to bring it to work to show a colleague who was interested in buying it. He carelessly walked around the house, pointing the gun at things and making click-click noises, pretending to shoot. Cootie then approached Krista from behind, placed the gun to the back of her head, and in that instant, the gun accidentally discharged. He maintained it was an accident and that he never intended to harm her. After realizing Krista was dead, Cootie panicked and was unsure of what to do. He admitted to staging a crime scene to make it look like a robbery, taking items from the house, including weapons and a DVD player, and driving to work. He left the front door open, hoping someone would notice and call the police. However, his plan failed. On his way to work, Cootie said he discarded the pistol and other items, such as his wife's jewelry, out the car window. Upon arriving at work, he only had the DVD player and a Sony radio left in the car. He gave the DVD player to a coworker, Allison Sharp, with whom he confessed to having an affair. Allison Sharp was questioned by investigators and revealed that her relationship with Cootie involved kissing and holding hands before and after his wedding. She claimed that the two had spent a night together at a Baton Rouge hotel. According to Sharp, Cootie took her to the Callaway Inn to help her relax when she was stressed. He paid for a suite with a jacuzzi and even brought china plates from his home to serve a meal with wine. At the time, Krista was away at church camp, and Cootie did not think she would discover his infidelity. Cootie had confessed to having financial struggles, earning only $11 an hour and struggling to pass a test that would have enabled him to earn more. The couple's washing machine was broken. Krista lacked health insurance and was unemployed, and they lived in a rental home despite their financial difficulties. However, Cootie acknowledged that he had found the money to pay for the night with Sharp at the Callaway Inn. Sharp denied any knowledge of Cootie's role in his wife's murder. After investigating, detectives cleared her of any involvement and released her without filing charges. Although Cootie confessed to causing Krista's death, investigators remained skeptical that it was an accident. It seemed suspicious that Cootie was wandering around the house with a gun, pointing it at various objects, and even more alarming that he placed the gun to the back of his pregnant wife's head. The police then focused on finding the murder weapon, which they discovered in the roadside bushes, where Cootie claimed to have discarded it. Ballistics tests confirmed that this gun was indeed the murder weapon. Cootie was subsequently charged with second-degree murder of his wife, first-degree feticide for the death of their unborn child, and obstruction of justice for allegedly staging a burglary at the crime scene. Investigators thought Cootie deliberately committed a crime so he could live with his mistress. He wanted out of his marriage, but his wife Krista was pregnant, and he didn't want to be a parent. Without thinking of the consequences, Cootie decided to get rid of Krista and their unborn child. After Cootie's arrest, Krista's parents, the Bakers, found the strength to forgive him. The family came together to mourn the loss of their baby girl, who would have been their fourth grandchild. Krista's father, Winford, remembered his daughter as a kind person who shared her life and had been on 17 mission trips. Her friends and relatives, close and distant, will remember her fondly. Winford Baker recalled speaking with Cootie shortly before his arrest, saying, "We had a brief conversation before his next interview. We hugged and cried together." Although Winford wants justice to be served, he had already forgiven Cootie even before knowing who was responsible. The only comfort was knowing Krista was in a better place. "She's with the Lord. She's in heaven. She's in a better place," he said. On August 2, 2009, the trial of Cootie began. Prosecutors argued that Cootie's actions after killing his pregnant wife suggested intentional behavior. They asked, if it was an accident, why didn't he call 911 immediately? Instead, he staged a robbery and left Krista's body for 12 hours before returning from duty and calling 911. Prosecutors also questioned Cootie's claim of an accidental shot, given his experience with weapons, which his father had taught him to handle. Defense attorney Louis Angelby stated that his client was grief-stricken over his wife's death, acknowledging that he made serious mistakes in his subsequent actions. Although Cootie never denied involvement in Krista's death, he deeply loved her, and poor judgment led to his mistakes. Cootie Alexander, 24, suddenly pleaded guilty to second-degree life deprivation of his wife Krista, halting jury deliberations. Prosecutors credited the breakthrough to the victim's family, who agreed to a long-standing plea bargain. In August 2009, the court sentenced Cootie Alexander to 55 years in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Millika Van Doorn. In 1999, 19-year-old Millika Van Doorn from Zaandam was the victim of a brutal attack after she missed her bus. It would take the authorities 20 years to catch the perpetrator, a breakthrough that was largely made possible by the advancements in DNA testing methods. Millika came from an ordinary, average family. She lived with her parents and two sisters in Zaandam. Located in the province of North Holland, Zaandam is a city that received city rights in 1811 and is situated on the River Zaan, just north of Amsterdam. Millika was friendly with everyone. Having just graduated from high school with a good reputation, she thought her life was just beginning and a great future awaited her. However, one fateful summer night would change everything. On Sunday, June 7, 1992, Millika attended her friend's birthday party at an apartment in a building that still looks much the same today, except for the taller trees. Although she was having a great time with her close friends, Millika decided to head home before the party ended because she lived in another part of town and needed to catch public transportation before it stopped running. Shortly before midnight, she bid her friends farewell and walked to the nearest bus stop, about 160 yards away, to catch her bus home. The bus stop, like the building, had changed very little over the years, as investigators would later discover. When Millika arrived at the bus stop, she realized the last bus had departed 30 minutes earlier. Although she was familiar with the bus schedule, she had overlooked the fact that due to the Christian holiday of Pentecost, the last bus left earlier than usual. Fortunately, Millika had an alternative way to get home, by taking the train. The train station was located on the same street as the bus stop, about half a mile away. Tragically, Millika never made it home. As she often spent the night at her friends' houses, her parents didn't initially suspect anything was amiss. The next morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church, which was near the train station and adjacent to a pond, made a shocking discovery during his morning walk. At 8:54 a.m., he found a body floating in the pond and promptly called the police. The detectives arrived within 5 minutes, and the Van Doorn family was soon overwhelmed with grief and sorrow. The body recovered from the water was identified as Millika's. Upon initial examination, investigators quickly realized they were dealing with a criminal case. Millika's body showed various injuries, including several stab wounds on her neck, face, and body. She was also found partially undressed. The perpetrator had attempted to conceal the body from passers-by by covering it with reeds, but this effort ultimately failed, and the body was discovered. Millika's tragic death was devastating for her family. She was young, with bright hopes for her future, but now her parents were left to grieve her loss. They struggled to comprehend who could have committed such a heinous crime against their daughter and what could have motivated them to do so. Investigators gained clarity about the motive for the crime after performing an autopsy. The medical examiner found semen and pubic hair inside Millika's body, indicating a sexual assault. Although her body was removed from the pond, There was no water in her lungs, suggesting that she died elsewhere and was later attempted to be hidden in the pond. The exact time of Milica's death remained unclear. It was possible that she died shortly after leaving the party, or it could have been hours later. Since her body was in the water, her time of death could not be determined by body temperature. While the pond was where the perpetrator disposed of the body, it was not where Milica met her demise. The police searched for the crime scene, believing that due to the severity of Milica's injuries, there must be evidence left behind. A crucial piece of evidence that could lead them to the crime scene, and possibly the perpetrator, was the fact that one of Milica's shoes was missing. They distributed flyers informing the public about the missing shoe and urged anyone who found it to contact the detectives. The second shoe was eventually discovered, but that's a story for later. In 1992, DNA technology was still in its infancy, so the DNA samples gathered from Milica's body were of little help to the police. They first questioned Milica's family to see if she had any conflicts with someone, or if there was an obsessive admirer who couldn't accept rejection. However, according to the family, Milica didn't have any enemies and her personal life was uneventful. She dated a peer, and they rarely argued. After learning that Milica had attended a birthday party before her death, investigators decided to interview all the guests who were present. Milica's boyfriend was among those interviewed, but despite numerous conversations, they didn't uncover any useful information. Everyone at the party told a consistent story. Milica had left around midnight to catch a bus back to her neighborhood. In 1992, cell phones were not as widespread, so it was impossible to reach Milica and confirm whether she had boarded the bus or made it home. Having cleared Milica's friends of suspicion, the police began searching for potential witnesses to the crime. They conducted door-to-door interviews with residents in the area where the body was found, gathering a lot of information but few specific leads. Several people reported hearing a woman scream during the night, but the noise stopped quickly, and they didn't think much of it. Other witnesses claimed to have seen a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle in the direction of where Milica's body was found. Investigators focused on members of the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood, where Milica's body was discovered. Some young men from the community had a history of run-ins with the law, but months into the investigation, the police were still unable to identify a suspect. All the men they questioned denied being near the pond on the night of the crime, leaving the investigation at a standstill. 6 months after the crime, a roofer working on the roof of St. Joseph's Church discovered Milica's second shoe, which had been there the entire time. Since it was impossible to access the church roof without a ladder, it was determined that the perpetrator must have thrown one of Milica's shoes onto the roof at some point, likely while they were at the pond. Any potential evidence that might have remained on the roof, such as marks or signs of a struggle, would have long since been erased by the wind and harsh weather. As the months turned into years, Milica Van Doom's case remained unsolved. This lack of resolution was a constant source of pain for her parents. The fact that their daughter's killer was still out there, living their life freely, while the Van Doom family's lives had been forever altered, was a cruel and bitter pill to swallow. Over the years, the police revisited the case, repeatedly interviewing local residents where the body was found, hoping someone would recall a crucial detail or offer new information. However, this effort yielded nothing. The case also received attention on various TV shows, prompting some to call in with tips. Unfortunately, these leads ultimately didn't bring the authorities closer to identifying a suspect. Despite the setbacks, the authorities had one significant advantage: DNA samples from the perpetrator, which were essentially waiting for advancing DNA testing technology to catch up. Medical analysts believed the perpetrator was likely a Turkish man, probably living in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and between 16 and 30 years old at the time. Around 200 local men voluntarily provided DNA samples, but none of these matched the perpetrators. Almost 20 years after Milika's death, a significant breakthrough occurred in April 2012. A change in Dutch law allowed for DNA kinship testing, a crucial development in the case. By combining evidence from the autopsy, crime scene, and the perpetrator's behavior, investigators created a psychological profile of the killer. According to the police profiler, Milika was an unlucky victim of a deeply frustrated individual who harbored strong resentment towards women. She simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The offender likely had a brief, tense exchange with Milika before grabbing her violently and making threats. After satisfying his primal urges, he realized Milika could identify him, so he decided to kill her. In the immediate aftermath, the perpetrator remained silent, possibly feigning illness to avoid social interactions and hide physical evidence of the struggle with Milika. The profiler described the offender as a hot-headed, self-centered individual with few friends and a history of treating girlfriends poorly. Based on this profile, the police believe the killer was between 18 and 25 years old at the time of the crime in 1992. In April 2016, the investigation into Milika Van Doom's case was reopened after a 20-year lull with no significant leads. A new development emerged in June 2016 when a report surfaced naming two Turkish men who had lived in Zandvoort in 1992 and had departed shortly after Milika's death. It was imperative to determine whether these two men had any involvement in the crime. However, tracking them down in Turkey proved to be a challenging task that took over a year. Ultimately, DNA analysis was conducted, and the results showed no matches between the DNA of the two men and the DNA found on Milika's body. In 2017, 25 years after Milika's death, the authorities decided to use DNA typing technology to try to identify the suspect. Scientific tests on DNA samples found on Milika's body revealed that the DNA almost certainly belonged to a man of Turkish descent. Based on this new information, the police contacted 133 men of Turkish origin who lived in the area where the body was found, as well as neighboring areas, in 1992. In November 2017, they asked these men to provide a voluntary DNA sample for research. The Netherlands Institute of Forensic Medicine was tasked with analyzing the Y chromosome pattern, which is the DNA pattern passed down unchanged from father to son. The authorities assured the men that their DNA samples would only be used in the investigation of Milika's case and would be destroyed afterwards. They also emphasized that the men to whom the request was sent were not suspects in the case. Nearly all of the 133 men of Turkish descent who were asked to provide a DNA sample voluntarily agreed, but a few refused. According to the police, 126 out of 133 men gave their DNA. A police spokesman praised the response, saying it was respectful and showed that the men wanted justice and a resolution to the case. It took about a month to analyze the DNA samples, but the wait was worth it. Experts did not find a match for the DNA of the man who attacked Milika 25 years ago among the samples. However, they did find a surprising match, a DNA sample from a man who was related to the perpetrator but was unaware of the connection. On Monday, December 10, 2017, the police announced that they had arrested a suspect in the case. The suspect was a 47-year-old man named Hussein, but his last name and photo were not made public due to local laws. Hussein was one of 7 individuals who had failed to provide their DNA for verification. However, he had an unsuspecting brother who cooperated with the authorities and submitted his DNA, unaware that it would ultimately lead to his brother's identification. By tracing family connections, authorities identified a suspect who evaded justice for 25 years. They obtained a DNA sample from Hussein, which matched samples from the victim's body. Despite denying guilt, claiming possession by an evil spirit, and a secret relationship with the victim, Hussein was formally charged with the crime. Milika's immediate family members testified at the trial. One of her sisters noted that the perpetrator remained silent for years, refusing to come forward, and failed to cooperate with the police when they requested a DNA sample. Additionally, he continued to live freely in the neighborhood, even starting a family with 4 daughters. On December 11, 2018, despite maintaining his innocence, Hussein was found guilty based on DNA evidence in the murder of Milika Van Doorn. The court ruled that Hussein had taken Milika's life to conceal a separate crime, specifically a sexual offense. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay 10,000 euros in compensation to Milika's family. Notably, Hussein refused to attend the sentencing, choosing to remain in a cell outside the courtroom after being escorted there. In February 2019, Hussein appealed the conviction, which led to his sentence being reduced to 19 years and 7 months. However, his imprisonment was short-lived. On June 13, 2022, Hussein was found dead. According to his lawyer, he died after a workout, and resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Smart. On June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was asleep in her bedroom in the affluent town of Federal Heights, Salt Lake City, Utah, sharing the room with her sister Mary Catherine. As the night wore on, their peaceful slumber was shattered. A soft-spoken man, armed with a knife, forced open a window in the girl's room, disturbing Mary Catherine, who pretended to be asleep in an attempt to protect her sister. The intruder then turned to Elizabeth, ordering her to remain silent, threatening to harm her if she didn't comply. Fearing for her life, Elizabeth obeyed, putting on shoes before being taken outside the house. Meanwhile, Mary Catherine lay still for 2 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to alert her parents, Ed and Lois Smart. When she finally woke them up, she told them that someone had taken Elizabeth, but her parents were initially skeptical, thinking their daughter might have been dreaming. However, as the events began to unfold, they took Mary Catherine's story seriously. After inspecting Elizabeth and Mary Catherine's bedroom, Ed and Lois found a cut window screen, which corroborated Mary Catherine's story. Concerned for Elizabeth's safety, Ed and Lois promptly notified the authorities. The police arrived at the Smart family home and questioned Mary Catherine about the man who had abducted Elizabeth from their bedroom. Mary Catherine described the abductor as having dark hair on his arms and the backs of his hands. Although the man had spoken quietly to Elizabeth during the incident, Mary Catherine could still identify his voice as somehow familiar, even though she couldn't recall any specific occasion when she had heard it before. About 3.5 hours after Elizabeth was taken, the authorities used the Rachel Alert system to broadcast information about her abduction to the public. The Rachel Alert, named after a Utah girl who was abducted and murdered, enabled the authorities to rapidly disseminate information to a wide audience and enlist the public's help in locating Elizabeth. The police investigated people who had toured the Smart family's home, which was up for sale, as potential suspects in Elizabeth's abduction since she had been taken from her bedroom on June 5, 2002. Additionally, they searched the family's computer, seeking any online interactions Elizabeth may have had with strangers, as this was a common tactic used in child abduction cases. The day after Elizabeth's kidnapping, her devastated parents, Ed and Lois, made a heartfelt and emotional appeal on national television, pleading for her safe return. Ed addressed the perpetrator directly, his voice filled with desperation and love, asking them to bring their daughter home. With tears in his eyes, he begged the person responsible to have mercy and return Elizabeth safely, expressing his immense love for his daughter and his unwavering commitment to finding her. In Federal Heights, the police interviewed Elizabeth's neighbors, but none of them reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the day she was abducted. The lack of information was surprising to the police, who had hoped to gather more leads to aid the investigation. Following Elizabeth's abduction, Rocky Anderson, the mayor of Salt Lake City made a public announcement offering an initial reward of $10,000 for her safe return to her family. This amount was later increased to $250,000. A massive search effort was launched, with nearly 12,200 volunteers joining Elizabeth's family and friends to look for her. However, at a news conference, the police admitted that despite receiving thousands of tips, their progress in the case was limited. The authorities in Salt Lake City solicited assistance from other police departments statewide, but lacked crucial evidence, such as a vehicle description, to pursue significant leads. As a result, the investigation into Elizabeth's disappearance stagnated, causing frustration among law enforcement officials. Captain Scott Atkinson of the Salt Lake City Police Department publicly stated that all individuals were still suspects in Elizabeth's abduction, while reaffirming that her family was not the primary focus of the investigation. A volunteer searching for Elizabeth reported a suspicious man to the police after spotting him in a wooded canyon. The volunteer described the man's suspicious behavior, prompting the police to launch an overnight search. Despite their efforts, they couldn't find the man and eventually dismissed the tip as not credible. The police also received a tip from a local milkman in Federal Heights. He claimed to have seen a man driving an older gray Honda or Nissan on Elizabeth Street a day or two before her disappearance. The milkman said he felt uneasy about the driver and wrote down the license plate number. However, when the police checked their database for the license plate number, they couldn't find any relevant information or leads, so they dismissed the tip as not viable. The police officers investigating Elizabeth Smart's abduction faced a significant challenge due to the large number of people who gathered at the Smart residence in the hours immediately following her abduction. When the police arrived at the scene around 4 a.m., they found the home already crowded with people, which compromised the integrity of any potential evidence. As the search for Elizabeth Smart continued, the police questioned a man who had interacted with her at a social event prior to her abduction. However, they soon cleared him of any suspicion and determined he had no involvement in her disappearance. The search efforts intensified, with over 20 volunteer pilots flying their private planes over the Salt Lake area, but unfortunately, these efforts yielded no results. Tracking dogs picked up a scent in Red Boot Canyon, several miles from Elizabeth's home, but police searched the area and found nothing. The search for Elizabeth had taken a toll on her father, Ed Smart, who was on the verge of exhaustion. He collapsed from the strain and was taken to the hospital, but was released a few hours later and continued searching for his daughter. Ed and his wife, Lois, were utterly exhausted, unable to sleep, and barely holding on. In a media interview, Ed expressed his frustration and determination to find Elizabeth, stating that they were holding on to hope that their daughter was alive and would soon return home to them. Despite their exhaustion, Ed and Lois Smart remained hopeful that Elizabeth would come back to them. Elizabeth's mother, Lois Smart, publicly declared her love and devotion to her daughter through a heartfelt statement to the media, saying, "Elizabeth, if you can hear us, we love you." Her loved ones gathered for a candlelight vigil, praying for her safe return home. Following Elizabeth's abduction, the police asked her father, Ed, to take a polygraph test, which he willingly agreed to, demonstrating his family's cooperation in aiding the authorities to locate their daughter. The investigation subsequently ruled out the possibility that Elizabeth had staged her own disappearance and confirmed that she did not run away. Police got a tip about Brett Michael Edmonds, who was sighted in Federal Heights around Elizabeth's abduction time. They looked for him but couldn't find him. He'd moved to New Mexico and Texas. After a chase, they caught a guy who looked like him, but it wasn't him. The police eventually located Brett Michael Edmonds in West Virginia, where he had been hospitalized due to an overdose and liver failure. Although his health was critical and there were fears he might not survive, his condition stabilized enough to allow authorities to question him about Elizabeth's abduction. In a fortunate turn of events, Brett was conscious, alert, and able to speak, enabling the police and FBI agents to interview him. During the interview, Brett fully cooperated with the authorities, who ultimately concluded that he was not involved in Elizabeth's abduction. After Brett Michael Edmonds was cleared as a suspect in Elizabeth's abduction, police turned their attention to 48-year-old Richard Albert Ritchie. Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart, informed police that he had employed Richard at his home for 2 months the previous year. Ed said that since Richard didn't own a vehicle, they made a deal. Ed would give Richard his 1990 Jeep Cherokee in exchange for his labor. However, Ed was unaware that Richard Ritchie was a career criminal, and he later stated that if he had known about Richard's background, he wouldn't have hired him. Richard Ritchie's criminal history dates back to 1973, when he was convicted of second-degree felony burglary, marking the start of a string of offenses over several decades. In 1981, he was convicted of burglary for a separate incident. His most serious crime occurred in 1983, when he was sent to prison for aggravated robbery and attempted murder after wounding a police officer during a gunfire exchange with authorities during a drugstore robbery. Additionally, Richard Ritchie was convicted of theft in 1996 for stealing approximately $2,500 worth of food from a food pantry in Richfield. Corrections records show that Richard Ritchie was paroled in September 2000. In a media interview, Ed Smart expressed doubts about Richard Ritchie's involvement in his daughter Elizabeth's abduction. Despite Ritchie's criminal history, Ed initially thought him a capable worker. On June 14, 2002, Richard Ritchie was arrested for a parole violation. The police could not confirm his whereabouts on the day Elizabeth was abducted. Richard Ritchie denied any involvement through his attorney and stated that the police had thoroughly searched his home, including digging up his garden. Despite this, no evidence related to Elizabeth's abduction was found. Ritchie claimed he fully cooperated with the police, providing blood samples for DNA comparison and sitting through 26 hours of interviews. He also handed over his vehicle for investigation. By July 2002, Elizabeth Smart had been missing for a month, and her family was desperate for her return. When police received a report of a girl matching Elizabeth's description in Nebraska under suspicious circumstances, they thought their prayers had been answered. A gas station witness reported seeing a crying girl, aged 12 to 14, who seemed to be held against her will in a minivan. The witness provided a detailed description that matched Elizabeth's appearance. This news sent shockwaves through the Smart family, who eagerly hoped for any lead that might help find their missing daughter. However, a thorough police investigation revealed that the report was unrelated to Elizabeth's abduction. Despite a thorough search, police found no evidence linking the sighting to Elizabeth's case. This disappointment left the Smart family struggling with mixed emotions as they continued to hope for Elizabeth's safe return while acknowledging the possibility of false leads. Undeterred, the Smart family remained determined to find Elizabeth, maintaining a cautious optimism. They refused to rule out the possibility that the girl at the gas station was Elizabeth, but stated that they needed to keep an open mind. The family spokesperson clarified that while they weren't necessarily holding out hope that it was Elizabeth, they would be overjoyed if it were. Richard Ritchie, the main suspect in Elizabeth's disappearance, was charged with theft and burglary in 2 separate incidents. One incident occurred on April 4, 2001, when he allegedly stole items from a house in the Federal Heights neighborhood, which is a second-degree felony and a Class A misdemeanor. The other incident happened on June 6, 2001, when he allegedly stole jewelry and a perfume bottle valued at approximately $3,500 from the Smart family home, which is a third-degree felony. Ritchie pleaded not guilty to these charges. The stolen items were not related to Elizabeth's kidnapping investigation. Salt Lake District Attorney David Yoakum announced the charges at a press conference, stating that Ritchie had denied the theft allegations and was subsequently fired from his job. In August 2002, the police investigation into Elizabeth Smart's abduction hit a major roadblock when Richard Ritchie, their best lead, died from a severe brainstem injury that caused bleeding. Ritchie's condition worsened rapidly, leaving him unable to communicate or breathe on his own. His family made the painful decision to take him off life support in a last-ditch effort to save his life. Although doctors operated to remove a blood clot from his brain and relieve pressure on his brainstem, the damage was too extensive and their efforts were in vain. Despite this setback, the authorities persisted in their search for Elizabeth Smart's abductor. However, Ritchie's death posed a significant obstacle to the investigation, undermining confidence in other leads and hindering progress in the case. In August 2002, a horrific crime was committed when an 11-year-old girl was taken from her bedroom and subjected to sexual assault and brutal beating. The severity of her injuries was appalling, with every bone in the middle of her face broken, as revealed by hospital doctors. She required surgery, but sadly, her condition remained critical after the attack. The police investigation led to the arrest of Javier Sickler, a close friend of the girl's father, who was charged with aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. Javier Sickler claimed that he remembered knocking on the front door of the victim's home, but alleged that he lost consciousness afterward. Despite initial similarities with the Elizabeth Smart abduction case, the police established that Javier Sickler was not involved in her kidnapping. As the search for Elizabeth Smart dragged on, the police began to explore unconventional approaches. They consulted psychics, individuals claiming to possess extrasensory perception that could uncover clues about her location. One tip from these psychics suggested that Elizabeth might be buried in a crypt in the foothills above Salt Lake City. This prompted a Seattle-based company to step forward, claiming that over a dozen of its members had pinpointed Elizabeth's body using a technique called technical remote viewing. According to these individuals, their psychic powers had revealed that Elizabeth was killed within hours of her abduction. However, when the police investigated the alleged tomb, they found no evidence of Elizabeth's whereabouts. In November 2002, Walter Kenneth Holloway was arrested after claiming to be the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart and demanding a $3 million ransom from her parents, Ed and Lois Smart. Holloway contacted the Smart family and the Salt Lake Police Department, threatening to harm Elizabeth if he didn't receive the money. However, the police tracked him down to South Carolina and found no evidence linking him to her abduction. Ed Smart was outraged by the extortion scheme, which he felt diverted police attention away from finding his daughter and wasted resources that could have been used to locate her. In October 2002, Elizabeth's sister Mary Catherine had a sudden realization. The voice of the abductor was identical to that of Emmanuel, an unemployed man the family had briefly hired to work on their roof and rake leaves in their yard. Although the police were initially skeptical, due to the short duration of Emmanuel's employment with the family, the long delay between the abduction and Mary Catherine's revelation, and her limited exposure to the abductor's voice, the family decided to have a sketch artist draw Emmanuel's likeness based on their descriptions. The resulting sketch was finally released in February 2003 and received widespread media attention, featuring on prominent television shows such as Larry King Live and America's Most Wanted. Relatives of a man named Brian David Mitchell identified a suspect drawing released by the police. They provided contemporary photographs of him, which helped authorities verify that the sketch was an accurate likeness. On March 12, 2003, two couples in Sandy, Utah, recognized Brian David Mitchell walking with a woman and a girl who they knew from the news as the missing girl's abductor. The woman accompanying Mitchell was later identified as his wife, Wanda Berry. The couples quickly called the police, and officers were sent to the location. After questioning, the missing girl from Salt Lake City, Elizabeth Smart, was confirmed to be present. The officers then rescued her and arrested both Mitchell and Barry. Elizabeth provided a shocking account of being abducted, abused, and held captive. Brian David Mitchell had taken her from her home to an encampment outside Salt Lake City. The camp was a makeshift shelter hidden by dense foliage for camouflage. There, she met Wanda Barzee, Mitchell's wife, who played a significant role in her captivity. At first, Wanda Barzee acted like a caring mother figure, offering Elizabeth comfort and warmth. However, as the weeks passed, Barzee's behavior changed dramatically. She began controlling Elizabeth, forcing her to follow their strange religious beliefs. Barzee demanded that Elizabeth pray, read scriptures, and take part in religious rituals. Elizabeth faced a highly traumatic experience during her captivity when she was forced to marry Brian David Mitchell against her will. Wanda Barzee threatened her with physical harm if she refused to comply with their demands. The wedding ceremony, which Mitchell pretended was a symbol of eternal love, was actually a sham with no legal validity, serving only to reinforce Brian David Mitchell's control over Elizabeth. After forcing Elizabeth into marriage, Brian David Mitchell began assaulting her. He claimed he was a Davidic king, tasked by a higher power to kidnap virgins to fight the Antichrist, as a justification for his actions. During her captivity, Elizabeth suffered unimaginable abuse, including being chained to a tree with a metal cable that severely restricted her movement and prevented her from escaping. In addition to physical restraint, Elizabeth was also subjected to psychological manipulation. She was forced to take the new name Esther, inspired by the biblical figure, which symbolized the loss of her identity and the control exerted over her by Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee. Elizabeth was repeatedly sexually assaulted by Brian David Mitchell, leaving her traumatized and fearful. She was also forced to look at explicit magazines, further worsening her trauma and degradation. Throughout her ordeal, Elizabeth was constantly threatened with violence and even death, leaving her in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety. To weaken Elizabeth's resistance, Mitchell frequently forced her to consume alcohol and take drugs, exploiting these substances to break down her defenses and make her more susceptible to his control. The constant intoxication left her disoriented, vulnerable, and disconnected from reality, making it easier for her captors to commit their atrocities. Moreover, Elizabeth was subjected to starvation and fed scraps by her captors. After her rescue, Elizabeth described Wanda Barzee as the most evil woman she had ever encountered. Following years of legal proceedings, Wanda Barzee pleaded guilty to all charges related to Elizabeth's abduction and was sentenced to concurrent 15-year terms in state and federal prison in 2016. Her federal imprisonment was eventually terminated, and she was transferred from the Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, to the Utah State Prison in Draper, Utah, to begin serving her state prison sentence. Elizabeth Smart spoke out against the release of Wanda Barzee in September 2018, despite which Barzee was still set free. At the time, Smart, an advocate for child safety, expressed concern that Barzee still posed a threat to others, citing her lack of remorse and signs of rehabilitation. The controversy surrounding Barzee's release drew media attention and highlighted ongoing concerns about the parole of convicted criminals. After years of legal battles, Brian David Mitchell was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping Elizabeth Smart. During the hearing, Elizabeth addressed her kidnapper directly, delivering a powerful and emotional statement. She described the pain and trauma he had inflicted, telling him that the 9 months in captivity had taken an irreplaceable part of her life. Despite this, Elizabeth showed remarkable resilience and determination, vowing to lead a good life despite the darkness he had brought into her life. Her words reflected her strength and determination to overcome her challenges. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Patrick De La Cerda. Patrick De La Cerda was born in June 1992 in Miami, Florida, to a loving family. His father, Max De La Cerda, was from Spain, and his mother, Patricia Ronza, was from France, and moved to the US in the 1980s, where she married Max and had Patrick. Patrick grew up in a supportive and caring environment, surrounded by his parents' kindness, mutual respect, and care. He was a bright, sociable, and friendly person who excelled in school and made friends easily. His parents prioritized his education and upbringing, providing him with every opportunity to become a worthy individual. Patrick's father was a skilled construction specialist who had worked in the field all his life. Although the family wasn't wealthy, they were considered well off by city standards. After high school, Patrick decided to follow in his father's footsteps by enrolling in the construction faculty. However, during his university years, his parents divorced after nearly 25 years of marriage. The divorce was amicable, with no conflicts or disputes over property. Patrick's mother moved to Deltona, where she remarried, while Patrick chose to stay with his father in Miami, where they worked together as respected professionals in the construction industry. Despite their divorce, the family remained extremely close-knit and supportive. They regularly kept in touch through phone calls and were always willing to help each other when needed. Patrick frequently visited his mother in Deltona, sharing his life updates, happiness, and experiences, and introducing her to his love interests. With his mixed French-Spanish heritage, Patrick had a charming appearance from a young age, making him popular among they. However, having grown up in a family that valued strong relationships, he never pursued casual flings, instead seeking true mutual love and a strong, loving family of his own. Patrick met Jessica on a popular dating site in June 2017. Although he wasn't sure he'd find someone special, he was drawn to her striking appearance and charming smile. Jessica, born in 1988 in Orlando, Florida, responded to his message, and they started communicating easily. She had studied banking at a local university and worked at a bank branch in Orlando. As they shared their thoughts and experiences, they quickly developed mutual sympathy and trust. After exchanging phone numbers, they talked for hours every evening for the next couple of weeks, building a strong connection. The young people, Patrick and Jessica, decided to meet in person after connecting online. Because they lived in different parts of the state, they chose a midpoint for their meeting. On their first date, Patrick was immediately smitten with Jessica and knew he wanted to be with her. Jessica also felt a strong connection, although she was slightly taken aback by their 4-year age difference. Thrilled, Patrick called his mom, Patricia, on the way home to tell her about the girl he wanted to marry and start a family with. Patricia could hear the excitement in her son's voice and knew he was serious, making her happy for him. As their long-distance relationship continued for several months, the couple faced the challenge of living far apart, only able to see each other on weekends in neutral locations. To spend quality time together, they would often rent a cozy hotel room in a secluded spot. They cherished these moments, but by Sunday evening, they would reluctantly part ways, returning to their respective homes to prepare for work on Monday morning. In December 2017, Patrick moved to Delton to be closer to his girlfriend Jessica, who lived nearby. He purchased a house in a quiet neighborhood and started renovating it to create a cozy home for when Jessica would join him. However, Jessica was unable to leave her job immediately, so they planned to have a housewarming party in early spring the following year. As the new year approached, Patrick decided to propose to Jessica. He set up a romantic surprise, arranging fireworks in the backyard of his new house. While Jessica was distracted by the display, Patrick got down on one knee and presented her with a ring, asking her to be his wife. Overjoyed, Jessica accepted his proposal. Patrick revealed that he had been searching for the perfect engagement ring for a long time, but couldn't find one that met his high standards. He settled for a decent ring from a jewelry store to propose before the new year, but he had already commissioned a custom-made ring from a jewelry workshop, designed specifically to his taste. Patrick's life was about to take a dramatic turn. It had been 2 months since he got engaged, and wedding and housewarming preparations were in full swing. Both sets of parents had given their blessing, and the happy couple was ecstatic about their future together. They were planning a grand celebration in either Miami or France, the groom's mother's hometown. But on February 27, 2018, concern set in when Max, Patrick's father, received a call from a courier. The delivery company had listed Max's number as an alternate contact. The courier reported that Patrick's order had been delivered to his address, but he wasn't answering the door or his phone. This wasn't like Patrick, and Max immediately felt worried. Since he was at work and couldn't check on his son, he decided to ask his future daughter-in-law for help. Patrick's father called Jessica, his voice laced with anxiety, saying he couldn't reach his son. Jessica had been trying to contact Patrick all morning, but he hadn't replied to her messages or calls. When she told Patrick's father, Max, he feared something must have happened to him. Jessica rushed to Patrick's house as quickly as possible. When she arrived, she saw his car in the driveway, suggesting he hadn't left. Using her own key, she entered the yard and loudly called out to Patrick, but there was no response. Jessica cautiously opened the front door and was met with a horrific scene. Her fiancé lay at the entrance, surrounded by a pool of his own blood, showing no signs of life. She immediately called emergency services, but the paramedics who arrived were unable to help Patrick and sadly declared him dead. By the time the police arrived, Jessica was devastated, sobbing in the backyard of the house where Patrick had proposed to her just 2 months prior. When an officer approached her, she pointed an accusatory finger at a single individual, a wealthy and influential ex-boyfriend. According to Jessica, he was responsible for murdering her lover and destroying her life. To make sense of this complex case, it's essential to go back in time to when Jessica and Patrick first met. At that point, Jessica was in a relationship with Gregory Bender, a successful businessman who owned an investment fund. He was 20 years older than her and had swept her off her feet during her student years. Gregory lavished her with expensive gifts and exotic getaways, and Jessica believed she had found her soulmate. However, she soon began to notice peculiarities in his behavior that raised red flags. Gregory exerted control over his girlfriend Jessica, monitoring her every move and conversation. If she had a male admirer, he would threaten and intimidate them away. Meanwhile, he was secretive about his own life, sharing little information with her. Their 8-year relationship was marked by Gregory's refusal to introduce Jessica to his family and friends. He dictated when they would spend time together, go on vacation, or visit his home, claiming to be too busy. Jessica longed for a normal family life, including having children, but Gregory always put it off, saying the time was not right. When Jessica attempted to end the relationship, Gregory proposed to her, and she accepted. However, nothing changed. They still lived apart and only saw each other when Gregory permitted. After Gregory was in a car accident and hospitalized, Jessica rushed to his side, but first, she stopped by his house to gather some belongings for him. Jessica encountered a mysterious woman at the house who refused to introduce herself and instead asked Jessica who she was. Jessica explained that she was the bride of the house's owner, showing her engagement ring as proof. The stranger then revealed her own ring and introduced herself as Diora Sanchez, Bender's legal wife. Stunned, Jessica decided to end her relationship with the cheating businessman. However, Gregory begged her to stay, promising to divorce Diora soon and marry Jessica instead. Naively, Jessica believed him, but time passed and nothing changed. Frustrated, she joined a dating site and met Patrick, with whom she started communicating. Finally, Jessica mustered the courage to break up with Gregory, but he refused to let her go. Bender initially tried to win Jessica back by promising to divorce his wife, but when that failed, he resorted to threats and harassment. When that didn't work, he became suspicious and decided to find out who Jessica was communicating with. He hired professionals to hack into her account and gather information. After discovering that Jessica was talking to Patrick, Gregory sent him threatening messages, claiming Jessica was his fiancée and demanding that he break up with her. While Patrick remained calm, believing the threats were empty, Jessica was terrified. She knew Bender had the means to carry out his threats, given his wealth, connections, and large collection of firearms. Jessica suggested ending their relationship to avoid hurting anyone, but Patrick refused to consider it. Instead, they went to the police and presented evidence of Gregory Bender's stalking and threats. As a result, they obtained a restraining order prohibiting Gregory from approaching or contacting them in any way. Additionally, the court ordered him to surrender all firearms in his possession. For a period of time, things seemed to return to normal, and the couple, Jessica and Patrick, thought they had finally escaped the stalker's attention. However, Jessica remained uneasy and persuaded Patrick to install security cameras both outside and inside their home, fearing that Gregory might ignore the restraining order. Let's go back to the tragic events of February 27, 2018. During the initial crime scene investigation, detectives quickly dismissed the possibility of a robbery and instead suspected a personal motive, given the brutality of the murder. The killer seemingly had a deep hatred for the victim. The 25-year-old victim's body had 4 gunshot wounds, including shots to the thigh, chest, and head. The examination also revealed injuries consistent with a fall from a ladder. The body was found lying on the floor between the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. The killer likely sneaked into the house and waited for Patrick on the second floor. When Patrick climbed the stairs, the intruder ambushed him, shooting him in the thigh. Patrick fell down the stairs, and the killer followed, shooting him again in the chest and then delivering 2 fatal headshots. The murder weapon, a rare and hard-to-get pistol, was never found. However, investigators discovered 3 shell casings, 1 on the second floor and 2 more downstairs. The 4th shell casing was missing, suggesting the killer took it as a souvenir. Jessica claimed to know the killer's identity, but the police initially suspected Patrick's neighbor, a U.S. Army veteran who had a history of conflict with the victim. The neighbor had been wounded and concussed in combat, which led to a mental disorder. The veteran was skilled with firearms and had access to rare guns. In December 2017, he mistakenly shot at his new neighbor, thinking he was a burglar. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, but the neighbor was hospitalized for a psychiatric condition that worsened due to the incident. After his return, the neighbor stalked Patrick, accusing him of being a spy and threatening to expose him. Given the neighbor's mental illness and potential motive, he was detained and questioned. Although he openly disliked Patrick, he had a solid alibi confirmed by multiple people at the time of the murder. The investigation focused on finding evidence and provoking a reaction from the perpetrator. The initial theory of a robbery was quickly dismissed since nothing was stolen or disturbed in the house, except for the hard drives containing video surveillance footage. This made it impossible to identify who entered or left the house that day. Forensic experts found no evidence, including fingerprints, shoe prints, or DNA traces, at the crime scene. The murder was meticulously planned, and although the investigators were convinced of Gregory's guilt, he seemed likely to get away with it. To catch him, the police devised a covert plan, asking Jessica to lure her former lover into a frank conversation. Jessica agreed and called Gregory, yelling at him, crying, and demanding to know why he had committed the crime. However, Gregory was suspicious from the start and feigned innocence, pretending to be shocked when Jessica accused him of murdering her fiancé. He even expressed condolences to her, never cracking under pressure. The police were unable to provoke him into a confession or a false move, and without sufficient evidence, they could only ask him to testify, but not detain or question him. Gregory had honored the restraining order and seemed to have moved on from his past with Jessica. Daura Sanchez Bender contacted the police with crucial information about the Patrick de la Cerda case. She had seen a suspicious notebook in her husband's office with a detailed plan of an unknown person's house and a strange algorithm of actions. Although she didn't think much of it at the time, She connected it to the crime after seeing a news report. The police searched her husband's office and found the notebook, but the relevant pages were missing. However, they were discovered in the trash can, where Gregory had carelessly discarded them. The pages contained a detailed plan of the crime, including instructions to avoid leaving traces. The records showed that Gregory had been stalking Patrick, knew his daily routine, and was aware of the surveillance cameras. Gregory tried to cover his tracks by disposing of evidence, but he made critical mistakes, including failing to destroy his records and underestimating his wife's curiosity. A fourth missing shell casing was found in a cigar box, confirmed to be from the crime scene. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the prosecution had enough circumstantial evidence to warrant Gregory's arrest. At the trial, Jessica testified about her tumultuous relationship with Gregory, including harassment and threats. However, the defense strategy focused on deflecting blame onto Jessica, accusing her of provoking Gregory's actions and being motivated by material gain. The defense downplayed the evidence of a murder plan, suggesting it was just a fantasy, and argued that the search of Gregory's home was illegal and the shell casing could have been planted. They also questioned the identification of the gun model by Jessica. During a court session, the defendant Gregory Bender's ex-wife, Dora Sanchez, testified as a witness. Until then, Gregory had shown little emotion, but he suddenly became animated and unexpectedly declared his love for Dora. This surprising confession seemed to influence Dora's testimony, and she began to question her initial statements. Despite her earlier claims, Dora said she was forgetful and eventually claimed that, having lived with Gregory for many years, she couldn't believe he was capable of murder. However, despite the lack of direct evidence and the defense team's efforts to challenge the search of Gregory's home, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder after hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced Gregory to life imprisonment without parole. As the sentence was read, Gregory fixed an intense stare on Jessica, his eyes unblinking, and seemed to glare at her. This made Jessica feel ill and brought her close to a panic attack. Jessica Devani sat beside her late fiancé's mother, overwhelmed with emotion, sobbing, and choking back tears. Despite numerous appeals by Gregory and his legal team, all attempts to overturn the verdict were rejected. The public was fascinated by the case due to its shocking nature. A wealthy businessman brutally murdered a working-class man and tried to escape justice. Patrick de la Cerda's story has been widely reported, with Gregory currently in prison. Jessica finds comfort in keeping Patrick's memory alive and feels safe. She wears the ring he gave her and a special piece of jewelry he had intended to give her. She remains close to Patrick's parents, who have welcomed her into their family as if she were their own daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano was born on November 30th, 1997 in northeastern Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of two children to Eggy Diro and Tony Mano, with an older brother named Alessandro. Although her parents divorced when she and her brother were young, her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support and staying in touch. During her school years, Celeste was outgoing, active, and popular. She participated in sports and dance, led the cheerleading team, and had ambitious plans for her future. Initially, she aimed to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, as she neared graduation, she found law unfulfilling and switched her focus to advertising and marketing. In 2018, she landed a job at a large e-commerce company that sold various products online. Celeste, a highly intelligent and talented individual, rapidly advanced in her career, going from a call center worker to a department head in under 2 years. Her exceptional abilities, initiative, and organizational skills earned her widespread admiration from colleagues. Besides her professional prowess, Celeste was also known for her stunning physical appearance, having been a participant in her university's beauty contest. With many admirers since her youth, Celeste was cautious in selecting partners. One such admirer was Lou Nader, a 16-year-older colleague who showed strong interest in her from the moment she joined the company. Notably, Lou was a reserved and unsociable person who lacked career ambitions, content with his long-held minor position. Celeste, a kind and smiling person, consistently turned down Louis's requests to go out with her, always doing so politely to avoid hurting his feelings. Despite this, Louis continued to try to get her attention through various means. To lighten the mood, Celeste would occasionally make jokes, but she remained firm in her decision to not pursue anything with him. Louis, however, misinterpreted her behavior as a challenge and believed that Celeste was simply playing hard to get, vowing to win her over no matter what. Louis's persistent attention was awkward, annoying, and refused to fade. Celeste maintained her composure, hoping that he would eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, as time went on, Louis became increasingly obsessed with Celeste, and his infatuation did not go unnoticed by those around them. One day, Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a relationship with Louis, citing 3 reasons: his peculiar and unpredictable nature, his lack of ambition and life goals, and their significant age difference. Celeste's admirer, Louis, made the fatal mistake of neglecting his work duties in his fruitless attempts to win her attention and affection. As a result, his productivity plummeted, and he received 3 reprimands and warnings from senior management. Eventually, he was dismissed from his job in early autumn 2019. When Louis was fired, he was devastated and on the verge of tears as he packed up his belongings in the office. Celeste, on the other hand, felt relieved that the unwanted suitor would no longer be a nuisance, but she also felt guilty, thinking that her rejection had contributed to his downfall. Mano, the department manager, thanked Louis for his years of service, escorted him out of the building, and offered him words of encouragement and luck before parting ways. Louis misinterpreted Celeste's reaction to his sudden kiss as a sign that she had feelings for him, despite her clear discomfort. He convinced himself that she was hesitant to pursue an office romance due to her position as his boss, and that their social differences were the only obstacle to their happiness. Emboldened by this mistaken belief, Louis decided to take matters into his own hands. After being fired, he created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. When she initially accepted, he began sending her multiple requests to meet up, which she first tried to politely decline before eventually blocking him. Celeste's former colleague sent her another friend request on social media, this time from a new profile. Despite her attempts to ignore him, he began commenting on her photos, complimenting her appearance, and suggesting they would make a great couple. She tried to limit her profile settings to prevent this, but a week later, she was still harassed. During a family gathering, Celeste confided in her relatives about the unwelcome attention, sharing the strange incident that occurred on the day he was fired. Her family listened, but they didn't take it seriously, assuming the admirer would eventually lose interest and leave her alone. What they didn't know was that the harassment was about to escalate. Although Lou didn't have Celeste's personal phone number, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number. She knew exactly who was behind them. The unwanted admirer sent her romantic poems, admired her beauty, and continued to try to convince her to go out with him. Mano received repetitive calls from her stalker, and she decided to answer once to have a direct conversation with him. She explained that there was no possibility of a relationship between them and asked him to stop contacting her. However, the stalker ignored her words and instead complimented her voice, expressing his happiness that she had finally answered his call. After this incident, Mano tried to block his number, but the stalker continued to harass her by calling from different numbers. This pattern of harassment persisted for months, during which Mano attempted to ignore him by blocking his numbers and fake social media profiles and not responding to his messages. She tried to maintain her daily routine, But the stalker's messages continued, transitioning from romantic to bold and threatening in nature. Eventually, the stalker's messages evolved from requests to demands, as he insisted on meeting Mono and sharing his delusional fantasies about what he would do to her. Celeste's situation took a dark turn when she discovered that her stalker, Louis, had started following her from work to her home, learning her address. At first, she didn't realize that Louis was physically present in her life, not just sending messages. She would occasionally catch glimpses of him near her home, but convinced herself it was just her imagination and paranoia. It wasn't until she finally acknowledged the truth that Louis was indeed following her every move, driven by his obsessive behavior. Celeste then sought police protection, requesting a restraining order to keep the stalker away from her and her home. However, the police were uncooperative and dismissive of her concerns. According to them, Louis hadn't broken any laws since writing poems and sharing explicit fantasies and messages wasn't illegal. Without concrete evidence of Louis's stalking, the police brushed her off, telling her to leave the precinct and let them focus on catching real criminals. A restraining order was finally issued against Sacco, prohibiting him from contacting Celeste in any way. At first, he respected the order and disappeared from her life for a few weeks, giving Celeste a sense of freedom and relief. However, her peace was short-lived. Less than a month later, she started receiving messages from unknown numbers. Sacco was pleading and then demanding that she drop the restraining order, claiming it was interfering with their supposed romantic relationship. Celeste immediately reported these messages to the police, as Sacco was violating the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to harsher consequences, including possible jail time. After this incident, Sacco remained quiet for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe he had finally left her alone. During this time, Celeste met Chris Riedale, a young man who shared her interests, values, and goals. They quickly formed a romantic connection. Celeste opened up to her new boyfriend, Chris, about the harassment she had suffered at the hands of a former admirer. Although it had been over a month since she last heard from him, she still felt anxious about the situation. Chris was supportive and reassuring, doing everything he could to make her feel safe and cared for. As their relationship progressed, Celeste felt comfortable enough to introduce Chris to her family at a dinner gathering in early November. Her family welcomed him with open arms, and her mother even joked that Celeste was now in good hands. The next few weeks were peaceful, with no signs of the former admirer. Celeste was happy and carefree, spending all her free time with Chris. On November 15, 2020, the couple went on a date to a cafe where they enjoyed each other's company and decided to capture the moment by taking a selfie. The photo of the couple turned out to be very romantic, showing them sitting together, embracing and smiling happily. Celeste was so fond of this picture that she decided to use it as her social media profile picture, also wanting to share the news of her new relationship and indicate that things were getting serious. Chris also shared the photo on his page, accompanied by a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste and his desire to keep her happy. However, this outing would be the couple's last. Tragedy struck on the evening of their last date. After Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, they said their goodbyes and planned to meet again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour chatting with her mother in the kitchen about her boyfriend before going to bed, as she had to wake up early for work the next morning. But on November 16, 2020, around 4 a.m., disaster struck when Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Eggy was awoken by suspicious noises, followed by banging, screams, and commotion. At first, she thought the sounds were coming from outside, but soon realized they were inside her house. Panicked, she rushed to her daughter Celeste's room, throwing on her robe and jumping out of bed. When she opened the door, she saw someone fleeing the room through the broken window. She turned on the light to find her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and tiny shards of glass. Celeste struggled to breathe, her eyes wide open and staring upward. Eggy called emergency services and tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. By the time the police and doctors arrived, Celeste had passed away. The autopsy revealed over 20 stab wounds on her body with a fatal blow to her heart. The police investigation concluded that the attack took less than 3 minutes, from the assailant breaking in through the window to the moment Eggy entered the room. Celeste was attacked with a large butcher's knife, and her attempts to defend herself left her arms with multiple cuts. When investigators asked her mother, Eggy, if Celeste had any enemies, she mentioned Louis Sacco, who had been stalking and harassing Celeste for over a year with frequent calls and threatening messages. Other family members, friends, and colleagues confirmed this information. At the crime scene, the attacker left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints and DNA evidence on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which also indicated that he had injured his hand. It was crucial to detain and question Louis immediately as the prime suspect and to verify all the evidence and witness statements. Louis was arrested on the same day, but he initially denied any involvement, claiming that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. However, forensic results soon confirmed that the bloody fingerprints found in Celeste's room and on the fence belonged to Louis. Additionally, law enforcement discovered that Louis had violated a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Celeste. Furthermore, surveillance footage showed that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store on the evening before the attack. Louis committed a horrific crime. He used a hammer to break into a woman's house through her window and then fatally attacked her with a knife. Louis bought a knife and a hammer and then waited until nighttime to carry out his attack on Celeste's home. His actions seemed deliberate and premeditated, yet his behavior was also erratic, raising questions about his mental health. Notably, the 39-year-old man had never been married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and struggled to hold down a job. Louis was a nervous and introverted individual who struggled with social interactions. He also had a biological brother who was currently serving a long prison sentence for a crime. As a result, the court ordered a forensic psychiatric evaluation for Louis. His attorney argued that instead of imprisonment, Louis needed specialized treatment to address his mental health issues, which required professional attention. The victim's family was outraged by the argument that the criminal, Louis, might avoid punishment by claiming insanity. However, psychiatric experts concluded that although Louis suffered from mental disorders, he was fully aware of his actions during the crime and had even planned it in advance. As a result, Louis was forced to stand trial, where he continued to claim that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. Despite his efforts, the jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 36 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case highlighted the need for reform in Victoria's criminal laws, particularly regarding online stalking. Celeste, the victim, had reported Louis to the police in 2020, but her complaint was not taken seriously because the law did not consider online harassment a crime. Her mother, Eggy, worked tirelessly to develop Celeste's law, which would have introduced criminal liability for stalking on social networks. Although Eggy presented over 40 recommendations to the Legislative Commission, almost all were rejected. Research showed that most online stalkers do not escalate their behavior, and the resulting amendments only restricted access to confidential social media information and allowed restraining orders in severe cases. Unfortunately, stalkers still faced no criminal liability, and Celeste's law was never enacted. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ronell Burns. Kiana was born on September 15, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri. After graduating from Riverview Garden High School, she attended St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she studied cosmetology. She soon turned her passion into a successful business, opening her own beauty salon, which became popular thanks to her hard work and dedication. Over the next 20 years, Kiana's salon grew to become one of the largest in the St. Louis area, a testament to her persistence and entrepreneurial spirit. However, her personal life was not without its challenges. Despite her success, Kiana struggled to find a suitable partner until she met her future husband, Ronell Burns, at the age of 44. Prior to meeting Ronell, Kiana had 3 children from previous relationships, whom she loved deeply. Her family and friends describe her as a loving mother, supportive friend, and accomplished businesswoman. Ronell Burns was born on May 14, 1975, in St. Louis, Missouri. He graduated from the High School of Fashion in 1994, where he excelled in basketball and competed for a state championship. Ronell was driven, ambitious, and passionate about competition, always striving for greatness. Before meeting Kiana, Ronell had 2 children from a previous relationship. When they met, they brought together their strong work ethics and ambition, creating a new, happy family. On September 13, 2012, Ronell and Kiana got married in a beautiful wedding surrounded by relatives and friends. After the wedding, Kiana discovered a new side of Ronell. It turned out that Ronell had dedicated his life to Jesus Christ at a young age and wanted to serve the Lord. He began helping anyone he could, including people he met on the street. Ronell even created a website where he coached and preached to spread his message. Ronell believed that God spoke to him in his early years, instructing him to help others. He interpreted one of these calls to mean that sometimes God chooses to communicate with everyone, and only He can allow certain events to occur in life. Ronell pursued his ministry, and his video messages gained immense popularity online. In addition to his impactful work as a church coach, Ronell was a financial counselor and insurance agent. He founded Traditional Financial Solutions, a company dedicated to helping people worldwide achieve financial independence. Ronell achieved great success in his business and humanitarian efforts, and his speeches drew large crowds. His wife, Kiana, supported him, and together they gained popularity online. Ronell was already well established as a leader and coach in the 6-Figure Ambition program, an online initiative for entrepreneurs. He had a substantial following on social media, with over 7,000 fond followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on his educational YouTube channel. By combining their business skills and family values, Ronell and Kiana Burns created something remarkable that positively impacted thousands of people. Kiana was a motivational speaker who shared her insights on success at business events. She also had a strong online presence, with 14,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted about her family life and inspiring quotes. In a popular video message, Kiana and her partner appeared dressed in luxury brands, talking about the benefits of entrepreneurship on their lives and those of their thousands of subscribers. The couple emphasized that their goal is to teach their audience how to become successful entrepreneurs and build a solid business foundation. They urged young entrepreneurs to stop wasting their hard-earned money and instead invest it wisely to generate passive income. Their message concluded with the belief that anyone can achieve greatness, not by being great from the start, but by taking the first step towards it. In the Burns family, only Kiana has achieved the success that Ronell often talks about. She has worked hard to build and operate a network of salons on her own, and was also a successful insurance agent. Her business generated most of the family's income. Ronell, on the other hand, focused on projecting an image of wealth, often posting photos of the family in expensive clothes and at fancy restaurants. Meanwhile, the wealthy and successful individuals took action, while poor people were drawn to the Burns family's enticing stories of making big money without effort. Ronell received a lot of attention from outsiders because everyone wants to become rich. He eventually founded a company with ambitious 6-figure goals, allowing him to continue building his wealth and creating his own legacy. which he frequently boasted about in interviews. The Burns had built a close-knit family unit, and to outsiders it seemed like they were living the perfect life. Ronell and Kiana, both successful in their careers, were inspirations to many, and their children, Rhea, Makai, and Ray Haley, were a big part of their lives. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Ronell suggested that Kiana leave her hometown of St. Louis and move to Atlanta, a decision that didn't sit well with her. Despite their 3 children together, Kiana was forced to make the move as Ronell had plans to expand their business. Kiana put on a brave face and pretended to be happy with the decision, but deep down, she was reluctant to leave St. Louis. On social media, she presented a perfect picture of her life, posting photos of the luxurious gifts she received from Ronell, such as a Maserati Levant car and her collection of Louis Vuitton bags. She would accompany these posts with captions expressing her gratitude and admiration for her husband. Like many social media influencers, Kiana also frequently posted about her family and children, painting a rosy picture of her life. Kiana, a woman who appeared to have a perfect life, revealed to her audience that everything wasn't as smooth as it seemed. In reality, she and her partner were on the brink of divorce after moving to Atlanta. This left Kiana alone in a new city, where she had to start from scratch. In a heartfelt video message, Kiana opened up to her subscribers about the challenges she faced when deciding to move and adapt to a new home and people. She emphasized that adjusting to new environments and people without the support of loved ones can be incredibly tough. Kiana also shared her struggles with mental health, expressing concerns about not being strong enough to overcome life's challenges. However, the question remains, was the move to Atlanta the primary reason for the imbalance in her family, or were there other underlying factors at play? In a speech, Kiana refused to mention that the real reason for the problems in their relationship was Ronell's infidelity and promiscuity, which he had kept hidden from their seemingly perfect life on social media. Later that night, Kiana posted a video of herself happily dancing at home with one of her daughters. However, a few hours later, the situation took a tragic turn. Kiana and Ronell got into a long and intense argument, which ended with Kiana grabbing a gun, shooting Ronell, and then herself. By the time the police arrived, neighbors had already gathered outside the Burns' home, reporting that they had heard gunshots coming from inside. The investigation initially suggested that Ronell Burns had taken his own life. But the discovery of Kiana's body in the next room with a gun in her hand revealed that she was the one who had made the fatal decision. While it was clear that Kiana had killed her husband, some people believed that she had been driven to do so after discovering his infidelity. Others thought that the couple's severe debt and Ronell's con artist tendencies had led to the tragic event. As people dug deeper into the couple's lives, they uncovered some revealing information from Ronell's ex-wife. She disclosed that during their divorce, she had learned that Ronell was a habitual cheater and had been reckless with her finances, leading to a ruined credit history and failed jobs. Ronell had then met Kiana, a successful career woman who was drawn to his confidence and charisma. Ronell, in turn, was attracted to Kiana's wealth, and the two seemed like a winning combination. However, their business ventures ultimately failed, leaving only Kiana's beauty salon intact. Despite this, Ronell continued to pretend to be a successful businessman, convincing others of his non-existent achievements. The Burns family presented a false image on social media, showcasing lavish purchases and happy relationships to conceal their severe financial struggles. Ronell posted about his business ventures, claiming he could turn any idea into a profitable success. Behind the facade of a devout Christian couple, they shared Bible quotes and scripture in their posts. They flaunted their luxurious lifestyle, posting photos of their homes, parties, and vacations, creating an illusion of wealth. However, this was all a ruse to hide their true circumstances. Unbeknownst to their followers, Ronell worked for a fraudulent American marketing insurance company that preyed on middle and lower-income families, exploiting them for financial gain. He even tried to recruit his own family and friends to join the scheme, seeking to boost his status. Despite his efforts, Ronald failed to generate enough income from the company and struggled to support himself. The Burns couple pretended to be prosperous entrepreneurs, convincing those around them of their success and even creating a TV show, Meet the Burns, to showcase their supposedly lavish lifestyle. However, their arrogance blinded them to their financial reality, and they spent all their earnings on luxuries, trying to be someone they were not. This reckless spending ultimately led to their downfall and bankruptcy. On December 19, 2019, Kiana and Ronell Burns officially filed for bankruptcy and had to sell some of their assets to pay their debts. Despite their financial troubles, Ronell and Kiana continued to present a false image of a happy family and successful business. But it became increasingly difficult to maintain this facade in St. Louis. Ronell, seeking to further his fraudulent activities, convinced his family to relocation to a larger city. This decision would prove to be yet another mistake. Despite their thriving business being their sole source of income, Kiana reluctantly agreed to the move. However, Kiana struggled to adjust to life in Atlanta. She was already aware of Ronell's repeated infidelities and had grown tired of her patient and silent nature. The couple jointly decided to divorce, but in the divorce papers filed on October 10, 2021, Ronell deceitfully cited Kiana's infidelity as the reason. Devastated, Kiana understood Ronell's motives were to maintain his public image, as their friends and family were unaware of the couple's troubles. Ronell sought to conceal the truth from the public, but on October 20th, 10 days after the divorce filing, Kiana publicly addressed a serious matter on live TV, her usual bright smile replaced by a concerned and sorrowful expression. After divorcing his first wife, Ronald Burns remarried a successful and wealthy woman named Kiana, adopting the persona of a devout guru to hide his true nature. He continued to exploit his new wife's trust and wealth, pretending to be a successful businessman. However, their seemingly perfect marriage was a facade. On November 9, 2021, Kiana shot and killed her husband Ronell before taking her own life. The Sandy Springs Police Department reported that no one else was present at the time of the incident. The tragic event left 8 children without parents. Despite the shocking turn of events, there was no record of domestic violence at their Atlanta home. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Kiana had asked her Facebook friends to pray for her, hinting at deeper struggles. The exact reasons behind her actions remain unknown. It's difficult to judge someone's decisions when they are struggling with depression and other mental health issues. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that 8 children are now left without parents, forced to navigate the world on their own. News of Ronald Burns and his wife Kiana's passing has spread quickly through their large social circle. Their deaths have been widely shared on social media, with many friends and acquaintances expressing sadness and sharing stories about the couple. Even those closest to them have paid tribute, although one friend's post revealed that few people knew the truth about the family until the end. Ronald Burns was known for flaunting his wealth and success, which often masks insecurity. He became so convinced of his own importance that he lost sight of reality. He ruined the lives of multiple successful women, misleading them with false promises of happiness and success. People like him have no self-respect or dignity. He's a con artist who preyed on his wives, deceiving them with fairy tales of eternal love and happiness. Unfortunately, he was able to manipulate them by playing on their emotions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On the evening of October 13, 2019, Antonia's family faced an unimaginable loss. Her sister Carla stopped by their parents' home to say hello to Antonia. Finding her sister seemingly asleep, Carla decided not to disturb her and began to leave. As she exited, she heard Antonia inquire about their mother and ask for the light to be turned off. Before saying "I love you" to Carla, Antonia turned away. Carla, thinking Antonia might just be tired or not in the mood, had no idea of the harrowing thoughts tormenting her sister. Later that evening, their mother, not receiving any responses from Antonia's room, went in and discovered a devastating sight: her daughter's lifeless body suspended above the floor. Overcome with shock, she sought help from neighbors, who assisted in taking down the body and calling emergency services. Shortly after the incident, Alejandro, Antonia's father, addressed the media, vowing to uncover the root causes behind his daughter's desperate act and to seek justice for her. Antonia was known for her vivacity and intelligence. It was clear that something significant had profoundly impacted Antonia. The autopsy confirmed self-strangulation as the cause of death. This case required immediate. Not waiting for official inquiries, the parents initiated their own investigation. Private detectives meticulously pieced together the last days of Antonia's life, identifying who had caused her despair. Promptly, Alejandro and Marcella reported Martin Penas to the police, suspecting him of exploitation. Little is known about Martin Penas. He was born and lived in Temuco, Chile, the same city as Antonia. Coming from a large family, parents, a sister, and a brother, the dynamics within his family remain unclear due to scant information available online. A young woman named Daniela Alvarez bore his child in his early years. Nonetheless, their relationship did not last long after the birth. They parted ways shortly after. Detectives discovered that between 2015 and 2017, Antonia and Martin communicated via a social network. At that time, Antonia was a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's photos, though their interactions were limited to the digital realm initially. However, they eventually met in person, which unfortunately led to tragic consequences. Antonia was born in the late 1980s into a strong and close-knit family. The Barr family home was large and spacious, suited for a family of their size. Alejandro and Marcella were loving parents who raised 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. Their household was filled with care and attention. The children were kind and well-behaved and did not cause any major trouble. Antonia was different from her siblings. She was very observant, reliable, and ambitious from a young age, which made her parents very proud of her. Doing well in school, getting along with her teachers, and having big plans for her future were some of her key characteristics. She dreamed of traveling and living a fulfilling life after finishing high school. Antonia successfully enrolled in her preferred university and began studying a popular subject. As a first-year student, she dedicated herself to learning the basics of her future profession, actively engaging in academic and social events, and making new friends who shared her interests and aspirations. She developed a strong bond with Consuela Urbe, a law school attendee. They frequently went shopping, attended parties together, and became very close. When Antonia ended her relationship with Rodrigo, Consuela advised her to keep herself occupied to cope with the heartbreak. With the breakup on her mind, Antonia agreed, seeking a temporary distraction from her troubles. The two friends decided to take a trip to Pan for Chile's Independence Day on September 18th. Coincidentally, it was there that Antonia crossed paths with Martin once again. Martin planned to attend an electronic music event at a local club named Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was performing. On September 17th at around 6:30 p.m., Urbe and Antonia set off for Pan with 3 other friends, including Consuela's boyfriend. The journey went smoothly, and upon arrival, they stayed in separate accommodations. The girls chose a summer house owned by the Urbe family. Later that evening, they got ready to attend a party at Black Room, expecting an unforgettable experience. Before leaving, Antonia texted her father, who cautioned her to be cautious around strangers. She assured him that being careful was her top priority. Martin Penas, questioned multiple times by law enforcement, denied any wrongdoing related to Antonia's fate. He asserted that their relationship was consensual and vehemently denied any involvement in the tragic outcome. Nevertheless, detectives had a different perspective, backed by evidence of their own. During the investigation, it was revealed that Martin had left pawn on September 17th around noon with friends, planning to return the following day. Upon reaching their destination, they hosted a party in a rented house filled with conversations, jokes, and alcohol. Antonia and Consuela got ready and went to the club. Upon arrival, they secured a table, ordered food and drinks, and enjoyed chatting and dancing. The Black Room Club turned out to be the perfect place for their unexpected reunion, much to everyone's delight. Throughout the evening, Antonia and her friend enjoyed each other's company, dancing and conversing. It was evident that there was a strong connection between them. At times, Antonia would leave to meet her friend or greet male acquaintances she had traveled with. Without realizing it, due to the long drive and an empty stomach, she consumed alcohol more than usual, which led her to lose track of her limits. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found her friend happily chatting with a mutual acquaintance named Amalo. Concerned, Consuela suggested leaving, but Antonia refused, feeling good and wanting to continue the night. Despite her friend's advice to stop drinking and reconsider staying, Antonia remained determined to stay. Sadly, Antonia's decision proved to be a mistake. According to Amelo's testimony during the investigation and in court, Martin approached Antonia, engaged her in conversation, and led her towards the exit. Amelo noticed Antonia seemed disoriented due to alcohol, but did not resist or may not have been fully aware of the situation. Amelo believed that Antonia willingly agreed to accompany Martin. However, surveillance footage provided a different account. Martin's friends mentioned they left in 2 cars, leaving no space for Martin and Antonia, who then walked away on foot. Store surveillance footage showed Martin coercing Antonia into entering a location along their route. In summary, this story highlighted conflicting viewpoints between personal testimonies and external evidence about the events at the Black Room Club that consequential night. Antonia was in a vulnerable state and unable to resist. Martin, a bit more sober, took control of the situation. Cameras captured them multiple times throughout the night. Pinus showed excessive affection, trying to kiss Antonia, who didn't reciprocate and attempted to pull away. Upon entering the rented house, none of Martin's friends paid attention to Antonia, except Barbara, a 19-year-old newcomer who hadn't been drinking. She noticed the intoxicated couple and observed them going upstairs around 9 a.m. Later that morning, Consuela received a voice message from Antonia, pleading to be picked up. Consuela didn't know her friend's exact location and used GPS to find it. She and her boyfriend Jose went to the designated location. Upon entering the house, they were met by a naked Martin covering himself with a pillow. When Consuela asked where her friend was, Martin claimed ignorance. They found Bara in one of the upstairs rooms lying on a bed in her underwear, quietly crying. Jose picked her up and carried her to the car. Consuela asked what had happened, but Antonia could only cry. The young couple tried their best to console her with hugs and attempts at conversation. Back at the summer house, Antonia confessed everything. Martin had exploited her against her will, and she felt powerless to stop it. Her memories were hazy. She couldn't recall much, but knew clearly that he had wronged her. This occurred when they went upstairs. Afterward, he left her alone and disappeared. Upon hearing this incident, Jose and Consuela insisted that Antonia report Martin to the police and seek justice. However, she refused, fearing that her parents and the public would find out. She chose instead to quietly endure the trauma and try to recover on her own terms. She asked them to tell no one about what had happened during their heartfelt conversation. At that moment, Antonia received a message from her father asking how she was doing and joking about whether she had been drinking too much, to avoid arousing suspicion. In responding in her usual manner, she inadvertently highlighted her own intentions. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to discuss the situation. However, he was dismissive and arrogant. He insisted that the events of the previous night had been consensual. At that point, Antonia realized she would neither hear the truth nor receive an apology. Recognizing this, she knew she had to try to move. Later, Psychotherapists invited to the court hearing explained that Antonia was experiencing intimacy trauma syndrome at the time. This syndrome is characterized by disruptions in physical, emotional, cognitive, and interpersonal behavior. Notably, this condition can appear immediately following an incident or even months and sometimes years later. The poor girl was suffering through an acute stage alone. She could not rid herself of distressing sensations, distraction, anxiety, and confusion, alternating with hysterics and crying. She undoubtedly felt a compulsive desire to cleanse herself, experiencing bouts of nausea or even vomiting. For 3 weeks, Bara kept silent and tried to behave as usual. A childhood friend confessed that she noticed nothing unusual about her. However, her classmates could not overlook the memory impairments and disorganization associated with the syndrome. One of them remarked on her declining academic performance, a very uncharacteristic change for the once disciplined student. When asked what was causing Antonia's poor health, it should be noted that a large number of witnesses came to the girl's defense during the trial: friends, acquaintances, and classmates alike. But what turned out to be the fateful decision's turning point? Perhaps Antonia would have sought professional help and remained alive over time, if not for a series of unfortunate events. Somehow, her terrible secret became known to an ex-boyfriend. However, the information reached him in a very unflattering form, which he quickly reported back to others. In response, Antonia stated she was not at fault for what had happened and asserted that the information he had was a gross exaggeration. Unfortunately, Rodrigo did not believe her. The day before the incident, Martin made a phone call. The details of their conversation remain unclear, possibly containing threats from his side. However, one fact stands out. The next day, the girl was no longer with us. Just a few hours before her death, she sent farewell message to her boyfriend and shared a childhood video in the family chat. In that video, Antonia was dancing and laughing joyfully, showcasing how much she missed her former self. She could not return to her previous way of thinking and living. This tragedy left a deep impact. Thanks to Alejandro's courage in sharing his daughter's story nationally, her plight resonated with the public profoundly. Antonia's name appeared on posters, social media hashtags, and even on building walls. Public support had an immense effect. In less than a week, women came forward with similar accusations against Prinis. 6 new charges were filed against him for actions spanning from 2010 to 2019. He turned out to be a criminal and was taken into custody. Martin's family sought protection for their leaked personal information, citing violations of their right to privacy and honor due to online harassment. They suspected Antonia's family's involvement in the matter. The Tomoko court granted their petition on June 12, 2020, restricting Antonia's relatives from sharing any details about the Asal family on social media. This decision caused a stir in Chile, with many feeling it favored Martin. Antonia's family appealed to the Supreme Court on July 21st, but the appeal was denied that same month. Subsequently, the suspect's lawyer requested protective measures for their client, who was later charged with multiple offenses. The public outcry in Chile grew as people united behind the Antonia case, advocating for justice for violence victims, especially women, nationwide. Finally, after years of silence, individuals began speaking out about their ordeals. On July 22nd, a surprising turn of events occurred when Martin Prinis was released from detention to house arrest. However, the judge clarified that this decision did not signify the final punishment. Despite the prosecutor charging Martin with 5 offenses, the court acknowledged only 2, leading to widespread protests across the country against the halting of investigations and the house arrest ruling. The authorities supported the citizens by sending a request to the appeals court, which promptly responded by revoking the chosen preventive measure and taking Martin back into custody. Subsequently, the same court removed the statute of limitations for 2 cases involving intimate violence. Simultaneously, Alejandro and various feminist organizations collaborated on drafting a bill to establish punishments for such crimes. Alejandro stressed that nobody should remain passive when witnessing a woman being led away by a man without resistance, especially if she is intoxicated. Barra emphasized the importance of taking necessary actions in such situations to prevent women from becoming potential victims. The investigation carried on until February 2021, when authorities discovered Martin's phone. Forensic analysis of the phone revealed photos of women's underwear and a record of them. The police report, nearly 400 pages long, included statements from victims, witnesses, and individuals close to Martin and Antonia. Even those who had known them since childhood offered their insights. Martin's childhood teacher recalled that he was a bright and cheerful child, particularly interested in intimate topics. Some women remembered him inappropriately touching them when they were young, but no one thought much of it at the time, since they were all children. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Tomoko began hearings expected to span over a month. During this period, the prosecution presented a series of evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. Video footage revealed Antonio's lack of control in certain situations. On August 26th, Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes related to intimacy and acts of aggression. The Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal on December 29th, disagreeing with the initial verdict. A new trial was set for spring 2023. Simultaneously, the Barr family's efforts bore fruit as the drafting of Antonia's law began. This proposed legislation aimed to enhance existing laws to ensure that perpetrators of violence, especially those leading a victim to commit suicide, would face inevitable imprisonment. On March 16, 2023, the defendant's legal team stepped down and public defense took over the case. The second trial began on April 24, 2024, involving 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of forcible intimacy. During this trial, Martin chose to speak and explained that his actions were a result of severe alcohol intoxication. The prosecutor argued that by drinking with the women, he rendered them vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, Martin was found guilty. The prosecution sought a 41-year prison sentence. Subsequently, on July 28, 2023, Martin Prenis, aged 31, received a 17-year prison term for 7 offenses related to intimacy committed against 6 victims. Factoring in time already spent in custody, he was to serve 14 years. The tragedy involving Antonia Barra helped uncover a dangerous criminal. The extent of harm caused by his actions to innocent women remains unknown. The boundary between harassment and flirtation is delicate, and one can never be fully prepared for someone to overstep it. Nevertheless, societal changes have improved perceptions regarding violence victims. There is a better understanding of the risks of unbridled desires and lack of self-control. Ultimately, the body and soul of each person are fragile, precious, and invaluable. This narrative revolves around a woman whose life was marred by deception from the start. Today, we discuss the tragic consequences of a shameless liar's pursuit of significant wealth and the numerous lives it can impact. Michelle grew up in Hurst, a suburb of Dallas, Texas, alongside her younger sister, Laura. Their mother left in search of better opportunities, leaving their father to raise them. Managing 2 daughters alone was challenging for him. He supported them through various odd jobs at construction sites and frequently consumed alcohol. In his quest for easy money, he resorted to illegal schemes. He worked at different factories and intentionally injured himself to receive insurance compensation. This fraudulent scheme worked temporarily, but eventually got exposed by security cameras at one factory, resulting in his arrest. Michelle learned how to lie and manipulate as part of her everyday life. She yearned to escape her circumstances, but couldn't break free from her ingrained habit of lying. It had become an integral part of her existence. She aspired to grow up and leave poverty behind. At 15, Michelle was very attractive, a petite brown-haired girl with an athletic build who gained popularity among boys, both her age and older. Recognizing that her beauty and charm could be powerful tools, she began manipulating men to get what she wanted, starting a series of relationships. At 17, Michelle dropped out of school and married 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien after convincing him she was pregnant. Kenneth joined the Army, assuming full responsibility for his young wife and their supposed unborn child. The couple moved frequently due to military assignments. They had 2 children together. However, temporary military housing was far from what Michelle desired for her life. Dissatisfied with such an existence, she left Kenneth after 5 years. She spread false claims that the reason for leaving him was abuse and infidelity on his part. After returning to Hearst, Michelle portrayed herself as a victim of domestic abuse in front of her relatives and friends. She received the essential support and began to rebuild her life. Sometime, she started dating Brandon, a former classmate. Deeply in love with Michelle, Brandon accepted her 3 children. The couple prepared for their wedding. However, Brandon discovered that Michelle was still married to her first husband. She'd been too afraid to initiate the divorce due to the abuse she claimed to have faced, hence never sent the papers. With legal assistance, they quickly resolved the issue and married in 1994. Initially, family life was pleasant. Brandon focused on building his IT company while Michelle worked as a dental assistant. However, a quiet family life did not fulfill Michelle's aspirations. She desired more. She began bringing home various dental equipment and stealing money. Brandon sensed something amiss. Eventually, Michelle was caught in the act of theft. Through sheer luck, she avoided trial, but Brandon's trust in her was shattered. Neighbors informed Brandon that numerous cars were seen at their house during his absence. Consequently, he installed voice recorders throughout their home and uncovered the presence of various men visiting during the day. Brandon conducted an investigation and discovered that Michelle's first marriage ended due to her infidelity, not because of her husband's abusive behavior as she had claimed. His patience exhausted, he demanded a divorce. Enraged by this decision, Michelle sought revenge while Brandon was at work. Brandon recounted an incident where she destroyed his aquarium worth thousands by pouring Comet into it, killing all the fish inside. Additionally, she poisoned his dog Domino with sleeping pills. These acts marked just the start of further turmoil for Brandon. In the unfortunate conclusion to their marriage, it became clear that Michelle's actions with other men were far worse than anything she'd done with Brandon. It emerged that John Paul Ray, another student from Hearst High School, was actually the father of her first child. Instead of informing John Paul Ray about this fact, Michelle convinced Kenneth O'Brien that he was the father, which led him to marry her and believe for 13 years that their eldest son was his biological child. Brando later informed the police that Kenneth had been paying child support for a child he believed was his, unaware of the truth. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, Michelle moved in with John, her first child's father. They lived together in a civil marriage for 8 years. Their relationship ended when Brando began to suspect infidelity. Michelle did not deny her affair, she admitted it. Brandon relocated, leaving most of their property to Michelle. Michelle's next relationship was with Greg Williams. Both had experience from failed marriages. Greg had been married twice and had a daughter. Following his 2003 divorce from Katie, they amicably decided on joint custody for their daughter Taylor without an official alimony agreement due to their good terms. Greg was affluent, successful, and generous, traits that made him ideal for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle welcomed a daughter named Michaela and got married the following year. Their marriage embodied the American dream: financial stability, children, and love, everything Michelle had wished for. It appeared Michelle's perseverance led her to achieve her dreams. Greg Williams held his family in high regard. Growing up in a disciplined household, he was self-made from a young age. Passionate about sports and holding a black belt in martial arts, Greg also had an interest in firearms. Both he and Michelle kept guns at home. While Michelle stored her silver .40 caliber gun securely in a safe, Greg kept his black Les Baer .45 caliber gun loaded under the bedside table. Together, the couple aimed to build a happy and fulfilling marriage. Michelle and Greg often hosted birthday parties for their children from previous marriages. Michelle's adult children frequently gathered for barbecues and enjoyed swimming in the pool. Their house was always bustling with friends and family. Yet despite their beautiful suburban home, Greg and Michelle were not a typical American couple. They had met through a BDSM website and discussed topics like domination, sadism, and masochism. Their vibrant house parties often led to numerous complaints from neighbors. To avoid further issues, the couple decided to relocate without making their decision public. The night before the move, both Michelle and Greg found it difficult to sleep. They were preparing to purchase a new house for $4.5 million and spent a lot of time discussing this significant purchase. Eventually, Greg stayed alone in the bedroom while Michelle went to comfort her crying daughter and fell asleep beside her. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., the police received an urgent call from Michelle. She tearfully reported that she and her husband had been attacked by an intruder who wounded her and shot her husband. Police arrived at the scene within minutes. Inside the house, they found a television turned on and a child sleeping undisturbed on the couch. It was Michelle's daughter, who seemed entirely unharmed by the incident. Observing Michelle closely, officers noted that her behavior appeared unusual for someone who had just experienced a home invasion. Soon, the street swarmed with police cars, detectives, and criminologists. The area got closed off, and officers searched every inch of the house. Michelle was fully dressed, her hair styled neatly, and she behaved quite calmly. She claimed to have been asleep, yet her attire and demeanor appeared otherwise. As the sole witness, Michelle was taken to the police station for questioning. After several of speaking with the police, Michelle's testimony began to falter. According to her account, an attacker dressed in all black struck her on the head with a wrench. She fell to the ground but remained conscious and heard a shot. Then, she said, the stranger exited through the back door. However, Michelle Williams' narrative did not align with what detectives observed at the crime scene. Greg Williams had been shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber gun, supposedly used by the assailant, was found near the back door along with a wrench. Neither had fingerprints. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry. Valuables like jewelry and money were left untouched. Footage from a neighbor's security camera showed only one car entering the closed area around their house a few hours before the incident. The police confirmed it belonged to a delivery boy. In an attempt to mislead investigators, Michelle concocted her own version of events. She claimed to have hit herself with a wrench and staged the scene as if it were a break-in. Yet detectives conducted thorough investigations and identified several inconsistencies. Michelle was fully dressed, her hair styled and makeup applied, suggesting that she might have been expecting someone. The firearm was discovered inside the residence. However, there were no fingerprints found. A critical piece of evidence contradicting Michelle's statement was $20,000 in cash, which remained untouched. Michelle could not provide a reason for why a successful businessman and dedicated father would decide to end his own life, but she did offer an explanation for her actions. Michelle asserted that her motive was to protect their young daughter from the harsh reality of her father's death. She admitted to law enforcement that she wiped the firearm clean and washed Greg's hands to remove any fingerprints. Following this, she staged a break-in at the residence and alerted authorities. While this account seemed unusual, it shed light on why there was an absence of evidence at the scene. Michelle confessed to sanitizing the crime scene with bleach and inflicting injuries on herself using a wrench from the onset. The police held reservations about the reliability of Michelle's testimony, yet at that time there wasn't any physical evidence linking her to the crime. Michelle faced arrest for providing false evidence, but was released shortly after. At about 5 p.m. on the day the crime occurred, Michelle visited her sister Laura's house. She didn't bring up Greg's name. During questioning by the police, her sister Laura shared, Michelle cried now and then, but did not seem genuine. Strangely, the next morning, Michelle woke up in excellent spirits. She dressed impeccably and did her hair and makeup. She seemed cheerful as she went to a well-known restaurant for breakfast, where she ordered pancakes with syrup. While law enforcement probed the theory that Greg might have taken his own life and sought motives and evidence, Michelle inadvertently revealed both motive and evidence of her involvement. Reviewing documents from the initial interrogation, officers noted a crucial point. Although Michelle claimed indifference toward money, her behavior suggested otherwise. After Greg passed, Michelle began withdrawing funds from family accounts rapidly and spent significant amounts of money. She processed these withdrawals through Greg's IT company. The specific amounts aren't disclosed publicly, but were presumed substantial. Following the proceeds from selling a frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made a critical error when she reached out to the insurance company aiming to claim Greg's life insurance payout. Michelle was the sole beneficiary of Greg's life insurance policy, issued on August 12, 2011, just before the crime occurred. Despite this, she overlooked a crucial detail. The terms of the insurance excluded coverage for deaths by suicide. Consequently, Michelle's claim for the $600,000 insurance payout was denied. This denial became the primary motive behind the crime. Subsequently, another instance of fraud came to light. Michelle had used falsified financial documents to secure mortgage loans for a house they intended to purchase together. Account numbers were deliberately altered, and these modifications went unnoticed by the lender. Following Greg's death, Michelle canceled an appointment with the mortgage company, resulting in the fraudulent account not being examined until it drew police attention. In fact, to add further intrigue, shortly thereafter, Michelle issued a check for $188,000 to her attorney Kenneth Wycorn and embarked on a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. The investigation extended over 3 months and meticulously dismantled all of Michelle's fabrications. The autopsy revealed that Greg had been shot from a distance ranging from 12 to 18 inches. Additionally, toxicological findings indicated that Greg had a significant quantity of sleeping pills in his system at the time of death. It was also determined that there was no evidence of a burglary. The comprehensive police investigation thus unmasked the true circumstances surrounding Greg's demise and exposed Michelle's deceitful actions. Mrs. Williams administered drugs to her husband and then shot him from a distance of 1 after increasing the volume of the television. Michelle's daughter, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the medical examiner's findings, Greg Williams' death was officially classified as a homicide. Michelle Williams was apprehended on January 9 while on her way to a fitness center. She faced charges of murder, evidence tampering, and providing false testimony to the police. She was both the sole witness to the crime and the primary suspect. Her bail was initially set at $522,000 for release from custody, but she was eventually released on $85,000 bail after spending a week in detention. Leaving the prison dressed in sportswear, Michelle wore an ankle monitor and was accompanied by Kenneth Wycorn, who formally represented her legal interests. Greg's first wife, Katie, expressed intense frustration upon discovering that Wycorn was defending Michelle. The funds used for his fees were part of Greg's estate and should never have been allocated towards the expenses of someone accused of his murder. Court records indicate Kenneth Wycorn served as Katie and Greg's divorce attorney. His name and signature appeared in legal documents related to their daughter Taylor's custody agreement in 2008. Wycorn defended his involvement by clarifying that while his firm oversaw the divorce proceedings, he never directly represented Greg's interest personally. According to Wycorn, he learned about the crime through an IT company employee. "It was very shocking," he remarked, and added that Michelle later requested his assistance. After her attempt to benefit financially from Greg's death failed, Michelle Williams adopted the name Shelley and sought a fresh start as a fitness guru, publicly announcing her relationship with Gene Wallace, who is nearly 15 years her junior and a friend of her eldest son. On Facebook, Shelley actively promoted their new fitness club in Bedford online. Over subsequent months, she wore an ankle monitor while enjoying time with her new boyfriend, participating in fitness classes and attending court sessions. Often dressing for court in miniskirts, knee-high boots, and low-cut blouses suggested little sign of mourning for Greg, according to Katie, Greg's ex-wife. Rob Conover, a longtime friend of Greg Williams for over 20 years, frequently attended Michelle's hearings. He recalled how she managed to manipulate the police officers into her as an innocent woman. On October 9, 2013, Michelle Williams, aged 45, entered a plea agreement with the county. She pleaded guilty to falsifying evidence and deadly conduct, resulting in an 18-year prison term for a third-degree felony in only a few states. Even though Michelle confessed to cleaning the gun found in Greg's body, doubts about her guilt arose due to the absence of her DNA at the crime scene. "Everything can go different ways. Go big or go home," Michelle stated in court. "With this plea deal, I'm counting on a few years in prison and then I'll be out on parole." However, in February 2014, Michelle abruptly changed her testimony and proclaimed her innocence. The judge immediately annulled the plea deal and scheduled a trial date. The initial hearings began for Michelle, who was labeled Black Widow by the media. She was accused of intentionally committing a crime against her husband in 2011 to claim insurance compensation. Prosecutors characterized the crime as a calculated scheme aimed at profiting from Greg's life insurance. They argued before the jury that Mrs. Williams had drugged her husband and subsequently shot him in the head to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money and greed, said Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland during court proceedings. Michelle's attorney issued a statement on her behalf. Kenneth Wincorn highlighted the challenges posed by the lack of evidence in this case. He pointed out that the prosecution tried to establish premeditation without considering that multiple house searches yielded no suspect DNA. Police had found cleaning supplies at Michelle's home. However, it was entirely plausible that her fingerprints were there since she lived there and cleaned regularly. On April 21st, the jury was unable to hear the complete and decide on an appropriate punishment. Family friends noted that the couple often quarreled. Based on messages found on social media and various messengers, frequent arguments between them primarily revolved around financial issues. During the trial, the prosecutor stated that in the hours before the incident, Greg Williams had a dispute with his wife over finances and even slapped her for spending funds meant for a house down payment. On the other hand, Michelle Williams's defense argued that Greg took his own life because she needed him alive, not dead. Defense attorney Clay Graham pointed out that Greg suffered from depression and used sedatives and steroids. On the day of the tragedy, he was allegedly experiencing severe depression due to losing his grandmother and best friend to suicide. The defense claimed that when Michelle discovered her husband's gunshot wound, she panicked and tried to hide evidence. Her primary concern was to shield their 4-year-old daughter from trauma by concealing the truth. Throughout the court appearances, Michelle Williams consistently attended in varying outfits, complete with makeup and manicures. At one hearing, dressed in a white blouse and black vest, she maintained a largely composed demeanor but did tear up during presentations of images of Greg Williams's body. Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, testified that his mother asked him to assist in framing Greg's ex-wife, Katie, suggesting she killed Greg over a custody disagreement concerning their daughter, Taylor. This plan faltered early on, since there had never been any disputes regarding their daughter's custody, a fact difficult to refute. 26-year-old Andrew expressed his shock at this request and thought his mother might be experiencing a mental breakdown. Michelle encountered her sons at the trial when they provided testimony against her. The jury ultimately found Michelle guilty of falsifying the evidence. She attempted to gain a delay in sentencing by claiming she was pregnant with twins. However, this claim lacked confirmation, and the verdict stood. Michelle's acting skills and charisma failed her in court. Faced with the choice between appearing as a cold-blooded criminal or a distressed wife and mother, Michelle opted for the latter. "He did it," she remarked, hiding her face in her hands. She even commended the detective on cracking the case, saying, "I wouldn't have survived this day without you. You won." Before the police expressed their doubts about Michelle's account, few believed that Greg had committed suicide. He had too many reasons to live and fully understood how profoundly a friend's death could impact others. Katie Williams suspected that Michelle began her affair with Gene Wallace while Greg was still alive, possibly providing a motive for the crime. If Greg discovered she was involved with another man, he would have left her, denying her financial benefits, Katie stated. Greg was tolerant but had no patience for infidelity. "She devastated numerous lives beyond comprehension," Brandon commented. "She is an expert in manipulation. If more of us had been heard in court, things might have turned out differently." Michelle received a 60-year prison sentence and must serve at least 30 years before being eligible for parole. She is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. As a criminal convicted of fraud and other premeditated crimes, Michelle Williams remains behind bars without showing any remorse or accepting full responsibility for her actions to date. In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was found in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Sabrina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tazewell counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In October of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley Ann Trapp was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walls was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend, and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son, describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude on the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicki Bomer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Bomer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Bomer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Bomer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicky Bomer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of the key. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to kill Sabrina, but he became enraged, thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road, where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them I would kill the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying their remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing Tamara Walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley in trap. Shakanda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to cremate his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenna Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dumped both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Clennon Engelman. Dr. Clennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927, in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Clen, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Clen and Ruth had remarried. Clen was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloodied man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931, in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois, by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Clen Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Clen Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time and the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow into doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the trike strip using dynamite to explode and then fill abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth hated the close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Holm. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and a hysterically Carmen flagged down the help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believe someone was target shooting at the X and accidentally struck Mr. Home. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Guswell in Everettsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Guswell. Guess who Ronald Guswell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Guswell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glennon Engelman. Following the murder of Ronald Guswell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned a South St. Louis dental laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis's labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower. He was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Home, and the Guswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for and were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Clement Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Hom and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a life sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in clerk by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a contact and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Goosewell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Ronald Goosewell and shot him, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Goosewell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Goosewell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita but convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Goosewell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time.